The Talarian expedition had descended upon the planet with all the arrogance and pride that came with millennia of galactic dominance. The atmosphere was thick with the sour scent of disinterest as Commander Valeros surveyed the ruins through his helmet's visor. The terrain was rugged, the ancient structures crumbling beneath layers of dust and neglect. Despite the eerily quiet and forgotten nature of the place, he dismissed it all as a waste of time, another relic of a species long dead. His team of scientists, hand-picked for their brilliance, were no more impressed. Dr. Iranis, the chief archaeologist, scoffed at the sight of broken stone and faded inscriptions. "How primitive," she muttered under her breath, a tone of disgust lacing her words. "A few thousand years ago, and they were still writing in what? Paint on rock. Pitiful." Valeros let out a dismissive snort. "Terrans were never a threat to the galaxy," he said, voice rich with confidence. "They couldn't even leave their own solar system without stumbling over their own mistakes. The idea that they might have been any more than a footnote in history is laughable." The team of Talarians, advanced in their understanding of technology, stood around the site, poking and prodding at pieces of what looked like ancient Terran machines. From their dissection of the artifacts, it was clear they were primitive, outdated pieces of tech. An old starship's hull, its power core long dead, lay half buried in the sand, its once proud metal frame now corroded and weak. But Valeros was undeterred. For him, the Terran race was nothing more than a fleeting memory, a species that had long been irrelevant. Then Dr. Iranis uncovered something unexpected, an object half hidden beneath the ruins, gleaming faintly under the harsh glare of the twin suns overhead. The object was spherical, its surface smooth and metallic, unlike anything seen in their star systems. She dusted it off, her breath catching slightly as her gloved fingers grazed its surface. The sphere hummed, faintly but unmistakably. "Commander, you might want to see this," she called over her shoulder, her voice suddenly tinged with curiosity. Valeros strode over, dismissing it with an idle wave of his hand. Another trinket, no doubt, but as he looked down at the orb, a strange sensation tingled at the back of his mind. The orb was warm to the touch, almost alive, as though it had been waiting for something or someone to activate it. Without thinking, Iranis pressed her palm against the sphere. Immediately, the ground beneath them trembled. What was that? One of the technicians spun around, eyes wide, as the tremors intensified. A low hum, like a distant engine, reverberated through the air. It was subtle at first, but quickly escalated into a thunderous roar. The artifacts around them seemed to respond, their dormant energy sparking to life. Pieces of the ruins began to vibrate, as if the planet itself were awakening from a long slumber. Valeros took a step back, alarm now creeping into his voice. "What did you do?" he demanded, but Dr. Iranis could hardly hear him over the increasing intensity of the energy surging through the ground. The sphere in Iranis's hands began to glow brighter, its light expanding, radiating outward like a beacon. For a moment it was as if the very atmosphere had turned to static, electrical tendrils arcing through the air, distorting the space around them. The Talarian team took cover as bolts of energy shot out, slamming into the ground, igniting small bursts of fire across the site. Valeros barely had time to shout orders when the energy wave struck the excavation equipment, frying circuits and disabling their communication systems. The ship they'd landed was no longer responding, its engines spluttering and dying. The planet had come to life, and now so had the relics. "Commander," Aranis's voice trembled as she backed away from the orb, her face pale with realization. "This isn't just a relic, it's a weapon." Kalros clenched his fists, eyes narrowing. "Impossible. No one in this galaxy has the technology to." The ground cracked open. A deep resonant pulse echoed from beneath the surface, sending waves of heat across the landscape. From the fissures emerged enormous metallic structures, sleek and intricate, unlike anything the Talarians had seen before. They were Terran ships, and they were waking up. Suddenly, the once-forgotten ruins erupted with energy, and a long-forgotten voice broke the silence. The sound was faint at first, but unmistakable, a transmission sent across the stars. "Humanity shall rise again." Valoros's heart skipped a beat as the words echoed in his mind. This was no relic. It was a signal. A message from the past, but more importantly, from something or someone still alive. And worse yet, it was directed at them. The Talarians had disturbed something they couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the rumblings intensified and the ancient Terran technology began to stir, Valoros's eyes burned with a sudden, unshakable realization. The Terrans, long thought to be a forgotten species, had been waiting for the right moment to return. The galaxy was about to change, and the Talarians were standing on the precipice of a new, unimaginable war. Cliffhanger. The ships above them shifted, massive engines roaring to life. A familiar shape emerged from the haze, the unmistakable silhouette of a Terran warship. It was no myth. The Sovereign had returned. This continuation injects urgency, mystery, and danger into the plot, propelling the story forward and ensuring that the audience is immediately invested in what happens next. The sudden awakening of powerful Terran technology and the discovery of a long-lost Terran warship make for a high-stakes and tension-filled beginning. The first tremors of the awakening were nothing more than a whisper, a faint vibration beneath their feet. But in an instant, the ground split open with an explosive crack, sending dust and debris into the air. The Talarians scrambled, their instincts kicking in as the planet seemed to come alive. The once-still ruins had transformed into a chaotic, dangerous landscape, like a forgotten weapon suddenly reawakened by an unseen hand. Commander Valoros stood motionless for a moment, his mind racing. His first thought was one of denial. He had seen many ancient artifacts, many of them long past their usefulness. But this was different. The energy rippling from the planet was undeniable. It was as if the very fabric of space had shifted, aligning itself in ways Valoros couldn't understand. "Get to the ships!" he shouted, snapping the Talarians into motion. "Move now!" But the team was already scattered, running to secure their equipment, some of them frozen in shock at the sight unfolding before them. Aranis, who had been the first to activate the relic, was now gripping her helmet, her breath shallow and ragged. She had been the one to unknowingly provoke the catalyst. A deep sense of foreboding weighed on her shoulders, but her curiosity pushed her forward. She had to understand what she had unleashed. She had to know what this was. Valoros marched toward her, his expression hard. "What have you done?" he demanded, voice sharp with authority. Aranis didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the jagged peaks of the planet's mountains had begun to shimmer with an unnatural light. She couldn't bring herself to answer him yet. The truth was too terrifying to speak aloud. A low hum filled the air, as though the planet was breathing, its ancient systems gradually coming online. The first sign of what was to come appeared in the sky above, a massive shape, gleaming silver and black, breaking through the dense clouds. It was colossal. It was alive. The shape resolved itself into the outline of a warship, one unlike anything Valeros had ever seen. The sleek, angular hull shimmered with energy, the design both elegant and brutal. This was not a ship built for diplomacy or peace. The faint glow of its engines pulsed in rhythm with the planetary shifts below, the energy of the artifact feeding directly into the ship's core. As the ship came closer, the Talarians instinctively took cover, their faces pale as the sheer scale of the machine became apparent. Ship hovered for a moment, its massive silhouette casting a shadow over the excavation site. And then, without warning, it descended. The ground quaked as the behemoth's landing gear slammed into the planet's surface. The rumbling noise from the ship's descent was deafening, sending tremors through the air, as if the very planet was protesting the return of something ancient. Valeros watched, breathless, as the hatch of the ship slowly began to open. The sound was like the grinding of metal on stone, an ominous creak that reverberated through the air. His eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in something colder, anticipation. Iranis finally spoke, her voice shaky but resolute. "This is the Sovereign. It's a Terran warship, lost, but still functional." Aros's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of the Sovereign, a legendary vessel said to be part of an ancient Terran fleet, long believed to be lost after their empire fell. But he never thought it would be real. He never thought anything related to the Terrans would be real. As the hatch opened fully, a beam of light shot out from the ship's belly, illuminating the surrounding landscape with blinding intensity. A figure emerged, tall and imposing in the doorway. It was humanoid, but its movements were mechanical, robotic, almost inhuman. The figure wore a dark, weathered suit of armor, the design unmistakably Terran. In one hand, it held a weapon, a rifle that seemed to pulse with the same eerie energy as the relics that had activated it. In the other, it carried a glowing orb, similar to the one Iranis had found earlier. It was the source, the key to unlocking the ship's true potential. Valeros stepped forward, unwilling to let fear show. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice steady but strained. The figure paused. Its face was hidden behind a sleek helmet, but Valeros could feel the weight of its gaze, even from a distance. The silence stretched for a moment, thick with tension. And then, to Valeros's shock, the figure spoke, its voice low, crackling with static. "You are the intruders," it said. "You are the ones who disturbed our sleep." Valros's pulse quickened. "We are Talarian. We came here seeking knowledge, nothing more." The figure tilted its head, and for the first time, Valeros could feel a flicker of something ancient and deeply resentful, rising from the being. "Knowledge," the figure echoed. "You've awakened something that should never have been awakened. Now you will face the consequences of your trespass." The ground beneath them rumbled again, and Valeros instinctively took a step back, his hand hovering over the weapon at his side. The figure raised its hand and pointed toward the sky. The Sovereign seemed to respond instantly, its engines roaring to life. The ship's hull began to hum with power, and the atmosphere around them crackled as a massive energy shield enveloped the ship. It was as if the Sovereign had become part of the very planet itself, drawing on its ancient power. Aranis' eyes widened in shock. We've triggered something more than we ever imagined. This ship, this entire fleet, wasn't just buried, it was sealed. Valros clenched his teeth. He had made a grave miscalculation, one that could cost him more than just his reputation. Cliffhanger! A deep, resonant boom echoed across the planet as the Sovereign's engines flared. Suddenly, the ground exploded beneath them, and from the depths of the planet's crust, enormous, monstrous machines began to rise. Terran war constructs, powered by long-forgotten technology, ready to wage war once more. This continuation keeps the tension high while expanding the mystery surrounding the Terran relics. The introduction of the Sovereign, its mysterious guardian, and the terrifying reveal of the hidden war machines raises the stakes, ensuring that the audience will be eager to find out what happens next. Captain Alara Drake stared at the live feed from the Terran outpost on the distant colony of Troll 7, her expression steely. She had seen the reports, the same disturbing signals and cryptic transmissions that had swept through the human fringe colonies for the past several months. They were all connected, an ancient eerie hum, a burst of alien energy, and then that message, repeating over and over, "Humanity shall rise again." Ira had believed it to be some kind of ghost signal, a relic of a forgotten Terran system, or an old military transmission that hadn't died out with time. But now, watching the frantic scramble of her fellow colonists, she understood. This was something far more dangerous. And it wasn't a call to arms. It was a herald for humanity's return to power. She adjusted the controls in front of her, glancing over her team as they assembled. Their small vessel, the Phoenix, was the last hope of a disparate and isolated human resistance scattered across the galaxy. They had been marginalized, forgotten by the major galactic powers. But now, the resurgence of Terran technology had begun to change everything. Her first officer, Lieutenant Gabriel Gabe Marks, stood at her side, scanning the galaxy's transmissions. "Captain," he said, his voice tight with urgency, "we've traced the origin of that signal to the Tellarian-controlled sector. It's coming from a planet known as Draxon. There's no mistake. It's directly linked to the Terran relics." Her waking up. Alara's mind raced. She had heard of Draxon, a place that had been previously written off as barren, an ancient graveyard for the forgotten races of the galaxy. But if what Gabe was saying was true, it was more than just a forgotten world. It was the heart of an ancient power, one that could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. "I need a team on the ground, now," Alara ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. "Prepare the ship for jump." But before the crew could even begin their preparations, a new alert flashed across their screens. A warning from the Galactic network. The Tellarians had mobilized. Hundreds of warships, each armed with devastating weaponry, were on course for Troll 7. The Tellarians had no idea that the Terran remnants were still alive, and they were not about to take chances. Alara clenched her jaw. The Tellarians had been the galaxy's unchecked empire for far too long. Their arrogance had blinded them to the strength of humanity's past. Now, with the Terran legacy rising from the ashes, they would have to reckon with it. "We're not just facing the Tellarians," Alara said, looking at her crew, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. "If the Terran relics are awakening, there's no way to know who or what else might show up." The Phoenix ripped through the stars, making the jump to the Draxon system at maximum speed. Alara's mind was sharp, focused, but her thoughts kept returning to the implications of the discovery. For all their tech, the Talarians hadn't been prepared for the sheer might of the ancient Terran war machines. Yet, neither had humanity. "We're coming in hot," Gabe announced, breaking her from her thoughts. "Race for impact." As the ship hurtled through the atmosphere of Draxon, the team could see the wreckage of old Terran ships scattered across the surface, remnants of battles fought long ago. But what truly caught their attention was a massive signal, like a heartbeat, pulsing with raw power, rising from beneath the planet's crust. "We're not alone," Alara muttered. The team deployed, landing near a massive excavation site where Talarians had been mining for years, unaware of the ancient power buried beneath them. The atmosphere was thick with dust, the ground cracked and scarred, a perfect mirror of the planet's long-forgotten history. As Alara and her team made their way to the heart of the excavation, a series of explosions rang out in the distance, followed by the unmistakable roar of engines. "Ambush!" shouted Surgeon Lucia Ford, Alara's combat specialist, as her hand shot to her blaster. Aryan soldiers poured from the smoke, advancing with military precision. Their suits were sleek, dark, and covered in the insignia of the Empire. Alara didn't hesitate. She drew her own blaster and aimed, the weapon's hum almost soothing against the rising tension. The first soldier fell in a silent, efficient strike, and the team moved in formation, cutting through the enemy with ease. For every Talarian that fell, another took their place, though they began to realize quickly they were outmatched. The resistance fighters, hardened from years of survival, were too skilled to fall easily to the Talarians' brute force. In the chaos of battle, a new signal suddenly blared through Alara's comms, one that made her blood run cold. The Sovereign, the massive Terran warship they'd discovered earlier, was no longer dormant. It was moving. No, it was launching its own assault. Alara's heart skipped a beat as she looked up to see a distant flash of light, a streak of destruction marking the sky. "The Sovereign is active," Gabe muttered, voice low with disbelief. "The relics, they've linked with it. They've started a war." The Talarian soldiers, now realizing they were no longer in control of the battlefield, pulled back, scrambling for cover. But it was too late. The massive war machines of the Terran fleet, once sealed away beneath the surface of Draxon, were emerging. Towering, multi-legged walkers powered by unknown energy, their weapon systems humming to life, aimed their colossal cannons at the Talarians. Ara couldn't afford to stay and watch. The time had come to make their move. She motioned to her crew, signaling them toward the wreckage of an ancient Terran fighter ship. If they could seize it, they might be able to make a strike against the Talarian command. "We need to stop the Talarians before they retreat to their superweapon," Alara said, already moving toward the fighter. "There's no telling what they'll do next." As they ran for cover, the first volley of energy blasts struck, illuminating the battlefront with explosive force. Fafanja. A massive Terran war construct, half a mile tall, loomed over the Talarian forces, its weapons charging for a final, devastating strike. This continuation keeps the momentum going with an action-packed sequence, introducing a new layer of danger and urgency as Alara and her team face off against the Talarians, while uncovering the full scope of the Terran resurgence. The stakes are raised as they come to grips with not only the Talarians' immediate threat, but also the sheer power of the long-forgotten Terran war machines. The ground trembled beneath Ilara's boots as she sprinted toward the battered Terran fighter, her eyes scanning the chaotic battlefield. The Talarian forces had regrouped, retreating into their fortified positions, but it was clear they were now on the defensive. The emergence of the massive Terran war constructs, towering behemoths of war, had turned the tide, and their sheer destructive power was already starting to tear through the Talarian lines. "We've got to move fast," Gabe called out, his voice strained as the first explosive shell from the war constructs struck the Talarian defenses. The sound was deafening, followed by the shockwave that rattled their bones. "We can't let them regroup." Lara nodded, her focus unwavering. Her mission wasn't just to help the resistance. It was to understand how far the Terran legacy had extended and what the Talarians had awoken. The Sovereign's return was just the beginning. What lay beneath the surface of Draxon was far more than relics. It was a forgotten power capable of reshaping the galaxy. "Need to neutralize their command center," Ilara ordered as she reached the fighter's controls, hastily pulling the cockpit canopy open. The fighter's engines hummed to life with an eerie familiarity, the low purr of the ancient ship almost calming in the midst of the chaos. She could feel the hum of the Terran relics beneath her skin, an undercurrent of energy that pulsed through the ship's very circuits. She was connected to something far bigger than herself now, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on her chest. "Get ready," Gabe said, jumping into the seat behind her. He activated the fighter's weapon systems with practiced precision, locking in targets as Ilara toggled the ship's thrusters to lift them off the ground. But before they could take off, a sharp crackle of static filled their comms. "Captain, we've got a problem." Sergeant Ford's voice was ragged with urgency. "The Talarians have brought in reinforcements. Dozens of ships dropping out of hyperspace." His eyes narrowed. She'd expected the Talarians to call for reinforcements, but not this quickly. The battle was escalating faster than they had anticipated. "Understood," Ilara replied quickly. "We'll draw them away from the surface. Keep the pressure on the ground forces." With a swift pull of the controls, the fighter shot into the air, tearing through the thick atmosphere of Draxon. The view outside was a blur of shattered terrain and the remains of Talarian and Terran war machines alike. The ancient constructs, now fully active, were devastating everything in their path, cutting through the Talarian warships like paper. Some of the behemoths had begun advancing on the remaining Talarian defenses, their enormous legs sending shockwaves that rattled the battlefield. As Ilara and Gabe broke through the atmosphere, the sky above Draxon opened up, revealing the full scale of the conflict unfolding in orbit. The Talarians had deployed a full fleet, a series of heavily armed ships now orbiting the planet, their weapons primed and ready to unleash destruction. The situation was becoming dire. They didn't have the luxury of time to engage with the full fleet, and there was still the lingering question: what exactly was buried beneath the surface of Draxon, and why had it awakened now? "Ora, look," Gabe said suddenly, his voice filled with awe. She followed his gaze, her eyes widening as a massive structure came into view, the Sovereign. The Terran warship had risen from its resting place on the surface of the planet, its engines glowing with a blue intensity that was almost blinding. It was slowly pulling away from the ground, the enormous hull dwarfing the surrounding terrain as it floated high above the battlefield. Its weapons were already activating, the massive cannons turning toward the Talarian fleet. "This is it," Elara muttered under her breath. "This is why we came here. We need to stop them before the Sovereign becomes fully operational." A transmission crackled through their comms again, and this time it was the voice of the Terran war construct they had encountered earlier. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion, humans," the voice said, its tone cold and mechanical. "The Terran Empire has been reborn. The galaxy will bend to its will once more." Elara's grip tightened on the controls. "We'll see about that," she said, determination settling into her bones. The stakes had never been higher. If the Talarians didn't fall back, they'd be crushed under the might of the Terran war machines. But if the Sovereign and its fleet fully reawakened, there was no telling what kind of galaxy would emerge from the ashes. Without a moment's hesitation, Elara flipped the switch, activating the fighters' weapon systems. "Lock on to their flagship. We'll start by neutralizing their command ship. Gabe, you ready?" Gabe's fingers flew over the controls, a tight smile tugging at his lips. "Let's do this." They shot forward, diving into the heart of the Talarian fleet. The fighters' targeting systems locked onto a Talarian command vessel, one of the largest ships in the fleet. With a smooth motion, Elara fired, sending a barrage of high-energy missiles streaking toward the ship. The explosions rocked the command vessel, but it didn't fall yet. Gabe fired again, and this time the target exploded, sending debris spiraling into space. It was a small victory in the midst of a larger war, but it was a victory nonetheless. As they danced through the chaos of combat, dodging fire from both the Talarian fleet and the war constructs on the surface, Elara's mind never strayed from the one truth that haunted her. The Terran legacy wasn't just a relic of the past. It was an unstoppable force. The Talarians had woken it, and now they would have to face the consequences. But they weren't the only ones. Fafanja. A new transmission crackled through Elara's comms, a message from the Talarian flagship. "This war is only the beginning. You have no idea who you've awoken. The true enemy is coming." In this continuation, Elara's team faces escalating danger as the Terran war machines unleash their power. The stakes continue to rise, with new threats emerging from both the Talarian fleet and the mysterious forces behind the Sovereign's resurrection. The tension builds, setting the stage for a larger conflict while leaving the audience on the edge of their seats. The Phoenix maneuvered through the debris-strewn expanse of Draxon's orbit, the massive Terran war constructs visible even from the chaos of the skies above. Their gigantic frames, towering over the Talarian ships, moved with a terrifying sense of purpose, their weapons firing in rhythmic blasts that shattered the Talarian fleet one ship at a time. Yet, amidst this unfolding destruction, Elara's gut twisted with an unsettling realization. Something was off. "We've hit their command vessel hard, but it's still operational," Gabe reported, his voice sharp with frustration as he scanned the damage reports flashing across his console. "They've reinforced their flagship. It's not going down without a fight." Ora's grip on the fighter's controls tightened. They had made significant progress, but the Talarians were resilient, and the stakes were growing higher. The war constructs were powerful, but they were not the threat. There was something else beneath the surface, something Elara hadn't accounted for yet. She glanced at the sky above Draxon, where the Sovereign was now fully airborne. Its weapons were locked, and its energy shield was deflecting incoming fire from the Talarian fleet with ease. There was no doubt that the Terran warship was a game-changer, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy had underestimated what it had truly unleashed. "Captain," Gabe's voice broke through her thoughts, urgency creeping into his tone. "There's something else happening. The relics. Not just activating the ships. They're altering the atmosphere. Look at the power readings." Ara's eyes darted to the side screen, which displayed a rising wave of energy emanating from Draxon's surface. The power signature was unlike anything she had ever seen. Not just energy, it was a form of consciousness, ancient and massive, like a planet-wide mind slowly stretching its tendrils into the galaxy. Was as if Draxon itself had been waiting for this moment, preparing for the arrival of something or someone. "What in the hell is that?" Alara whispered, unable to hide the chill crawling up her spine. "I don't know, but it's not good," Gabe replied. His voice was tight, and his fingers hesitated over the ship's weapon systems. "This is more than Terran tech. It's like the planet is coming alive." Alara's mind raced. The planet? She had heard rumors, ancient legends among human survivors, about worlds that were more than just lifeless orbs. Some spoke of sentient planets, ones that could bend time, space, and energy itself. But these were just stories, weren't they? Old myths, lost in the winds of history. God, what she was witnessing wasn't a myth. It was reality. "Captain, we've got another problem." Ford's voice crackled through the comms. "The Talarian reinforcements have just made their move. They're converging on the surface. Their ground forces are digging in near the ancient Terran ruins, right where we suspected the power source is." Ara clenched her teeth. The Talarians weren't just attempting to repel the Terran war machines. They were trying to seize the core of the power that had awakened. And if they managed to get their hands on whatever lay buried beneath Draxon's surface, the war wouldn't just be for control of the planet. It would be for the control of the galaxy itself. "Can't let them do that," Alara said firmly. "Gabe, get us down to those ruins. We need to neutralize their ground forces before they can access whatever is buried down there." The fighter's engines screamed as Alara pulled the ship into a dive, racing toward the craggy landscape below. They sliced through the air, narrowly dodging fire from Talarian fighters as they descended toward the ruins. As they neared the excavation site, the full scale of the Talarian operation became clear. Hundreds of soldiers were entrenched, their energy shields flickering as they set up defensive positions. Heavy artillery units were being wheeled into place, aimed directly at the large, glowing obelisk that stood at the center of the ruins. Deploying the landing gear, Alara muttered, adjusting the fighter's angle for a controlled descent. "Get ready, Gabe." As they touched down with a thud, the ground beneath them shook, and the sky above exploded with light as Terran war machines fired on the Talarian positions. The fighters and walkers had already begun their assault, and the ancient war machines were proving far more devastating than the Talarians had expected. But still, they fought on, scrambling to gain ground. Lara and Gabe disembarked from the fighter, weapons at the ready. Ford's team was already there, clearing out Talarian infantry with swift, precise strikes. But it was the sight of the obelisk that drew Elara's attention. Its energy was pulsing now, more pronounced than before, casting an eerie blue glow over the entire battlefield. "What the hell is that thing?" Abe asked, his voice low as they crouched behind a rock formation for cover. "It looks like it's alive." "That's no ordinary artifact," Elara said, eyes narrowing. "This is the heart of the relics, the key to whatever power is awakening here." Suddenly, an earth-shattering roar shook the ground, and the obelisk began to crack, fissures forming along its surface as though the stone itself was being reborn. From deep within the cracks, a pulse of energy erupted, sending waves of blinding light and heat in every direction. Elara's heart raced as the entire planet seemed to respond, the ground trembling violently beneath her boots. "Get back!" Elara shouted, grabbing Gabe by the arm and pulling him toward cover. But it was too late. From the center of the glowing obelisk, a massive figure began to emerge. It was humanoid in shape, but made of raw, glowing energy, an ethereal form coalescing from the core of the planet itself. It was ancient, far older than anything the galaxy had ever known, and as it stepped from the obelisk, the ground itself seemed to bow under its power. "This is what we've awoken," Elara whispered in horror. Danger. The energy being locked eyes with Elara, and in that moment she understood. The Terran relics were only the beginning. Whatever this entity was, it wasn't here for war. It was here to reshape the galaxy. In this chapter, the tension mounts as Elara's team faces an even greater threat than the Talarians. An ancient, sentient force hidden beneath the surface of Draxon. The discovery of this mysterious being raises the stakes even higher, signaling that the conflict is not only about Terran relics or Talarian domination. It's about awakening a power that could alter the very fabric of reality itself. The chapter leaves readers with a chilling sense of impending doom and a thirst for answers. The air hummed with an unnatural energy as the massive glowing entity stepped fully from the cracked obelisk, its form shimmering in the strange blue light that radiated from the deep fissures in the planet's surface. Elara's pulse raced. There was no mistaking it now. This being was not merely an artifact. It was a force, an ancient power, a remnant of something far older and more dangerous than even the Terran war machines had been. The planet was alive, and it was waking. The ground beneath their feet trembled again, sending rocks skittering across the cracked earth. The energy being towered over them, its translucent form pulsating with an otherworldly glow. It was humanoid, but its features were vague and fluid, constantly shifting as though it were still forming itself, like a living sculpture coming into being. It towered over the battlefield, its size dwarfing anything Elara had ever seen. "Gabe, I don't think we can fight this," Elara said, her voice low, tinged with disbelief. Gabe's eyes were wide with shock. "That thing, it's not from any race we've ever encountered. It's—" A sudden surge of power from the entity interrupted him, sending a shockwave through the air that knocked Elara and Gabe off their feet. The Talarian soldiers scattered, but it was clear they had no idea how to combat such a force. The war constructs, which had been obliterating the Talarian forces moments ago, now paused, their massive guns silent, seemingly unwilling to engage the entity. was as though the planet itself was now in control. The entity raised its arms, and with a sound like thunder, a pulse of energy shot out, rippling through the ground and causing the air to shimmer with heat. The pulse cut through the Talarian defenses like a hot knife through butter. Soldiers and war machines were torn apart in an instant, evaporated by the sheer force of the energy. The sky above them seemed to crack open, filled with swirling blue light as the planet's power surged outward. "This is insane," Gabe shouted, pulling Elara to her feet as the shockwave subsided. "We need to get out of here. This isn't a war. It's an extinction event." Elara was barely able to process the chaos around her. Her mind raced, trying to comprehend what was happening. The Talarian fleet was in disarray, their ships tumbling from orbit as their systems overloaded. The energy from the obelisk was not just destroying the Talarians on the ground. It was dismantling their entire military apparatus. The Sovereign had already ceased firing. The warships above Draxan had lost all power. The entire system was falling apart in the wake of this entity's awakening. "Can't just run," Elara said, determination creeping back into her voice. "We have to figure out how to stop this before it spreads." "I don't think stopping it is an option anymore," Gabe replied, his voice grim. "That thing, it's not just a weapon. It's the power of the planet itself. It's sentient, and it's in control. We're just pawns in its game now." Aura's mind raced through every piece of Terran history and technology she had studied. She had been trained to handle every type of weapon, every kind of adversary, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. This wasn't just an enemy force. It was an elemental force, a consciousness tied to the very fabric of the planet. But then, amidst the turmoil, she remembered something. A piece of data she'd uncovered during their initial investigation into the Terran relics. There had been whispers of an ancient race, the Arathians, who had once ruled the galaxy. According to Terran legends, the Arathians had discovered how to merge with entire planets, becoming one with them in order to create living worlds, creatures of unimaginable power. If this entity was truly what she suspected, then it wasn't a being that could be destroyed by conventional means, but it might be stopped, or at least contained. A plan formed in her mind, a risky, nearly impossible plan, but one that might work if she acted quickly. "Aura, what are you thinking?" Gabe's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "I need to get to the heart of the ruins," she said, her voice suddenly filled with purpose. "That obelisk, it's the key. If we can get to the heart of the energy source, I think we can reawaken the Terran systems buried here. They might still be able to counteract the entity, or at least force it into a dormant state." "You're insane," Gabe said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That thing's going to tear us apart before we even get close." "I know," Elara said, "but we don't have a choice. The Talarians are already dead. The galaxy is next unless we can stop it now." Before Gabe could respond, Elara sprinted toward the ruins, dodging debris and the remnants of Talarian soldiers who had been caught in the energy pulse. The glowing obelisk now loomed like a beacon of destruction, its energy rippling out in waves that distorted the very air around it. The entity hovered nearby, still growing in size, and as Elara approached, it turned its ethereal gaze toward her. The world seemed to freeze for a moment, and for the first time since her arrival on Draxan, Elara felt the full weight of the power before her. The entity wasn't just watching her, it was aware of her. She could feel its presence in her mind, like a cold breath across her thoughts. It was as if it could hear her every intention, understand her every action. "I am the Arbiter," the entity's voice boomed in her head, its tone like the crashing of waves. "You have awakened me, and now you shall witness the rebirth of all." Alara's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the base of the obelisk, the energy surging around her, threatening to tear her apart. But she couldn't stop now. If this entity succeeded in its goal, the galaxy would burn, and humanity would never see the light of day again. At every ounce of her remaining strength, Alara activated the Terran relics embedded within the ruins, connecting herself to the dormant systems beneath Draxon's surface. A deep hum filled the air, and the obelisk began to pulse in sync with the energy beneath her feet. The ground shook again as a new surge of power rose. Cliffhanger. But as the systems began to power up, Alara realized there was something she hadn't accounted for. The entity wasn't just a guardian of Draxon. It was in the relics. And the battle she was about to face was not one of destruction, but of control. In this chapter, Alara faces a terrifying new force, the sentient entity that has risen from Draxon's core. The stakes have escalated beyond a simple war with the Talarians. They are now dealing with a planet-bound consciousness capable of reshaping reality itself. Alara's plan to fight back hinges on activating Terran relics, but the true nature of the entity complicates everything. The tension builds as the entity becomes aware of her presence, setting the stage for an epic showdown. The air crackled with power as Alara's fingers danced over the Terran relics embedded within the ruins. The ground beneath her hummed with the energy that had been dormant for millennia, as if the planet itself was responding to her actions. But as the obelisk pulsed in time with the newly awakened systems, a deep, resonant voice thundered in her mind once again, sending a chill down her spine. "You cannot control what you do not understand, human." The entity, the Arbiter, spoke. Its voice seemed to reverberate in every corner of her mind, overpowering all other thoughts. "I am not just the planet's guardian. I am its will made manifest. I am Draxon." Ara gritted her teeth, the hum of the Terran systems growing louder as the relics activated in unison. The energy from the planet surged through her, flooding her senses with visions, images of civilizations long gone, of wars fought in the distant past, and of a power unlike anything she had ever encountered. The entity's presence was all-encompassing, but she couldn't let herself be overwhelmed. She had to focus. "Then we are about to change Draxon's will," Alara muttered to herself, forcing the panic and fear aside. She understood now. The entity was the embodiment of this world, its purpose intertwined with the very fabric of Draxon's existence. But she also understood that she wasn't alone. The Terran relics were connected to this power, perhaps in ways the entity itself didn't realize. "Alara, what the hell is going on?" Gabe's voice broke through the chaos of her mind. She could hear the panic in his tone, but his words grounded her. They didn't have time to fight the entity head-on. They needed to regain control over the systems before the planet fully merged with the Arbiter. "We're going to have to sync the Terran systems with the entity's consciousness," Alara said, her voice firm despite the tension coiling in her chest. "If we can access the central core beneath the obelisk, we might be able to force a control shift. The power's still in flux, and I think we can harness it." "You're talking about merging with that thing?" This belief was palpable, but Elara didn't have the luxury of doubt. She needed to act. The energy pulse from the obelisk intensified, and the Arbiter's presence grew stronger, almost suffocating in its force. The entity was aware of her plan now, its ethereal form growing larger, tendrils of blue energy swirling around it like a living storm. "You think you can control me?" The Arbiter's voice boomed, sending a shockwave through the air. "You are nothing compared to the might of Draxon. The galaxy shall kneel before its rebirth." Elara could feel the pressure in her mind, the weight of the entity's will pressing against her own. It was like trying to hold back an avalanche with bare hands. Yet, amidst the mental storm, she could still feel the connection to the Terran relics, pulsing with a strange but familiar energy. The systems weren't just reactive. They were designed to interface with something far older, something embedded in the core of the planet. "We'll see about that," Elara muttered, her fingers tracing the final symbols on the control panel. The ground beneath her feet rumbled as the central core below the obelisk activated, sending a series of cascading energy surges into the air. The blue light flared brighter, temporarily blinding her as the obelisk's power reached its zenith. Elara felt herself being pulled into the heart of the energy storm, her body and mind seemingly on the verge of being consumed. And then a blinding flash of light erupted from the obelisk, engulfing everything in its path. Elara's consciousness was torn from her body, pulled into the abyss of raw, untapped power. The visions returned, of past civilizations, of distant stars, of ancient powers that once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. But these images were not just of the past. They were intertwined with the Arbiter's consciousness, and she could feel it, the entity's true nature. It was not merely a guardian or a weapon. It was a living thing, born from the very heart of Draxon, with an ancient purpose that transcended time. "Submit," the Arbiter whispered, its voice now a soft, insistent murmur in her mind. "You cannot resist the inevitable. Draxon's will is mine, and mine alone." Elara's vision blurred as her own consciousness fought to hold on to her sense of self. She couldn't let the Arbiter take over. She couldn't let it merge with the Terran relics and rewrite history. She fought back with every ounce of strength she had left, pushing against the entity's influence. The key was the relics. She had to make them respond, make them counteract the Arbiter's control. Her mind screamed as the connection deepened, the world around her shifting and warping as if time itself was unraveling. But then, with a sudden rush of clarity, Elara realized the truth. The relics weren't just machines. They were linked to the very fabric of the galaxy's history, built to interface with ancient, forgotten powers. If she could direct the relics to align with the energy signature of the Arbiter, she might be able to turn its own power against it. With a fierce cry, Elara focused every thought, every fragment of her will on the Terran systems. She poured all her energy into synchronizing the relics with the Arbiter's energy flow. She needed to break through the barrier between their consciousnesses. The power surged again, and for a moment it felt like her mind would split in two. But then a strange sensation filled her, the relics responding to her call, resonating with the Arbiter's energy. For the first time, she felt as if she had gained control over the storm. A voice, different from the Arbiter's, whispered in her ear, cold and authoritative. "The time to reclaim the galaxy is now." The Terran systems were in full operation, their influence flowing through her like a river of raw power. The connection was established. She had done it. But as the Arbiter's form shimmered in front of her, Elara knew this was only the beginning. The planet was still alive, still conscious. The entity wasn't just going to accept defeat, it was going to fight. Cliffhanger. The Arbiter's form twisted and began to solidify, its power surging even more wildly than before. "You have merely delayed the inevitable," it boomed, its voice filled with fury. "The galaxy will fall before me." In this chapter, Elara gains temporary control over the situation by sensing the Terran relics with the Arbiter's power. The battle for control reaches its peak, with Elara teetering on the edge of mental collapse. The tension builds as the Arbiter fights back, and Elara realizes the true magnitude of the challenge ahead. The chapter ends with a sense of fragile victory, leaving the audience anticipating the next stage of the conflict. The universe seemed to hold its breath as the Terran relics surged with power, their hum filling Elara's mind. The very fabric of the battlefield warped as she held on, struggling to keep her focus while the Arbiter loomed in front of her. The entity was no longer just an ethereal being of light. It was becoming something far more tangible, its shape solidifying, its presence pressing down on Elara like a massive weight. "You cannot hold me, human." The Arbiter's voice rumbled, reverberating in every corner of her consciousness. "I am the will of Draxon. I am the planet's soul. You cannot stop what has been set in motion." Elara's teeth clenched as the power of the relics coursed through her veins, pushing back against the Arbiter's crushing will. The planet trembled beneath her feet, as though it, too, were caught in a struggle between two forces. Her fingers pressed harder into the controls, sending waves of energy back at the Arbiter, attempting to counteract its influence. But she knew it wasn't enough. The relics were powerful, yes, but they weren't the key to defeating the Arbiter. She realized, with growing urgency, that the solution lay not in opposing the Arbiter directly, but in understanding it, understanding Draxon. If she could connect with the heart of the planet itself, she might be able to redirect its immense energy. The only problem? The Arbiter was now fully aware of her intentions and had already begun to lock her out. The entity's form seemed to pulse with rage as a final surge of energy blasted toward her, sending Elara stumbling backward. She fought to maintain her balance, the pressure in her skull growing unbearable. Her mind was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of the power it was now forced to channel. "You will never understand what you have awoken," the Arbiter hissed. "This is beyond your comprehension, beyond your grasp. The galaxy will kneel before Draxon's rebirth." Elara's chest tightened. The Arbiter spoke of rebirth, but what did it truly mean? Was it the planet's will to reshape the galaxy, or was it simply the arrogance of an ancient power, seeking to return to a time when it ruled all? "Enough," Elara muttered under her breath, focusing every ounce of her resolve. Her thoughts shifted, her understanding deepening as the pieces of the puzzle snapped into place. The Terran relics weren't simply dormant machines waiting to be activated. They were a response, a counterbalance to a force like the Arbiter. They had been built to interface with entities like this, to harness and redirect powers on a planetary scale. What she needed wasn't just control, but harmony. She reached deep into the Terran systems, attempting to align their energy with the Arbiter's. It wasn't enough to fight the entity's power. She had to sync with it, redirect it through the relics, and at the same time sever its connection to Draxon's core. The complexity of the task felt overwhelming, but Elara had no other choice. If she failed, the galaxy would burn. A violent pulse of energy shot through her body, and she screamed in agony as her mind was overwhelmed by the surge. The Arbiter's voice rang in her ears, louder now than ever before. "Foolish human, you cannot merge with me. You are not worthy of the power you seek." But in that instant, something changed. Alara's senses expanded. The connection to the planet deepened. She could feel Draxon's heartbeat beneath her feet, its core resonating with the energy of the universe, older than any civilization, older than time itself. The relics were not just ancient tech, they were an extension of the planet's will, designed to keep it in balance. This was not just a fight for survival, it was a battle for the soul of Draxon. And then she understood. The Arbiter, this godlike entity, was not an enemy to destroy. It was a part of something far greater, a part of the planet's essence. The Terran relics were not meant to defeat it, but to balance it. The power of Draxon, when left unchecked, would consume everything. But with the relics working in harmony, Alara could stabilize it, ensuring that no single force could dominate. She closed her eyes, letting the Terran systems interface fully with the planet's core. The sensation was like diving into a vast, living ocean of energy. She could feel every layer of Draxon's being, every ancient force that had shaped it into the world it was now. It wasn't just about controlling the Arbiter, it was about aligning the planet's will with the future of the galaxy. The Arbiter screamed, its form flickering, warping as Alara's energy resonated with the planet's core. The sheer power of Draxon, funneled through the relics, began to overwhelm the entity. The Arbiter's voice became frantic, its presence growing more erratic. Lashed out with tendrils of blue light, but Alara stood firm. She had found the key. The power of Draxon was no longer fighting against her. It was working with her, channeling through the relics. The planet's will was beginning to bend to her influence, and with it, the Arbiter's control began to falter. The storm of energy that had once threatened to annihilate everything now calmed, becoming more focused, more directed. The Arbiter's power slowly dissipated, the blue light fading from the sky. With a final, anguished cry, the Arbiter's form shattered into fragments of light, dissolving into the air like dust in the wind. The ground stopped shaking, the oppressive energy lifting. The battle was over. For a moment, Alara stood alone in the ruins, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had done it. She had found a way to preserve Draxon, to restore balance, and to avert the destruction of the galaxy. The relics had been the key all along, not as a weapon, but as a tool for harmony. But as she looked around the battlefield, now eerily silent, Alara knew that this victory came at a cost. The galaxy would never be the same again. The power of Draxon had been reshaped, and with it, the balance of the universe had shifted. Blog. As Alara and her team made their way back to the Phoenix, a new dawn rose over the ruins of Draxon. The planet, once dormant, now hummed with quiet life, its future uncertain. But in the distance, a faint flicker of light could be seen, another relic, another power, waiting to be discovered. The galaxy, forever changed, lay ahead, and with it, new challenges and possibilities. The battle for control had ended, but the true journey was just beginning.